Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Megha. So, congratulations on a new book, Our Bones in Your Throat. And, well, for people who haven't read this book, it's actually a campus story, but she's used the style of Gothic narration to convey the story, actually. So I guess in Kerala, at least, there is a rising fascination with the Gothic, and you two have used the same strategy to write this campus story. Is there any specific reason why you chose this style?
I guess for me, the Gothic feels like, when you use the term Gothic, it's associated with darkness, with gloom, with death and decay, and then again, rebirth. Even in Our Bones in Your Throat, there is a lot of that. And putting it against the backdrop of a campus felt like the right thing to do at that moment, because I think the campus is a microcosm of the real world out there. So that's the first time, you as a young adult enter into that sort of a world, and you come across a lot of socio-political issues of your own, and I think that's when you develop a certain kind of consciousness. So it feels scary, it feels dark, and I also see
the professors, they contribute to the feeling of eeriness and fear? I mean, this is a young adult literature that we're talking about, and I'm on the other end of the spectrum. So am I the vampire?
I'm on no spectrum at all right now when it comes to this. So we'll have to ask someone who's a student right now. But yeah, the Gothic is also a reminder of a haunting. And a haunting is always about, the way I look at it, it's about coming back. I look at ghosts as histories that are suppressed. A haunting is always returning to a narrative because that narrative has not been allowed its space. And that's what I feel about the Gothic. And I do see the Gothic coming back a lot. If you've noticed movies like Frankenstein, and even they had this Dracula movie come out recently. Even they have Wuthering Heights coming out now. So the Gothic is making a very big return.
Well, from where I look at it, Gothic or the spectral narrative, it always had something to do with the social realities of the time. For example, Dracula, actually people were dying of tuberculosis at that particular point of time. And then you had these, the repressions caused by patriarchy, and that's what resulted in all these witch hunts and all that. So the societal control of women, which they could not react to at a particular point of time, they manifested that through these narratives. So for me, spectral narratives as well as Gothic narratives, there is a resistance, power of resistance to it, particularly when you look at writers from Kerala like I see Ayyappan, whose spectral narratives are very powerful, talking of the subaltern return. So in your novel as well, you have this witch hunting, which is societal control over women. So could you speak about that as well? And a little about the story that you're trying to tell through this.
Of course. A witch hunt is, in many ways, just trying to change the narrative because a group of people do not align with the same opinion that someone in power has. And that's how it's been right from the time of classical witch hunts in Europe and even colonial North America. That's where it started. And then you move on to modern day contemporary witch hunts as well, where communities are, narratives change when it comes to talking about certain communities. Even if you look at what's happening in Palestine, right? The way it's being communicated, people in power would love to call it a conflict. They would love to call it a war, but it's a genocide. And when you use rhetoric to control the narrative so that a group of people who are already oppressed, they are more oppressed, then that becomes a sort of witch hunt. And you even see this happening, let's say someone speaks against the government. They become an anti-national, right? So using rhetoric to control the narrative and turning people against that group of people. That's what I would call a witch hunt. And I see that happening all the time to women throughout history. Policing the, policing the clothes you wear, policing the kind of things you say, the opinions you have. You're always conditioned to be polite right from the start. And there's also that whole, Madonna whore complex that people have. The whole, okay, you'll have to fit into this structure to be labeled a good girl. And outside of that, then, then we're going to throw you to the wolves. So, yeah, the witch hunt is a way of controlling people, basically. And even in the novel, that is what happens, because there are these women who constantly find themselves being laughed at for their poetry, constantly laughed at for their opinions, questioned, and then it becomes a massive witch hunt.
I mean, would you like to talk about the story as such, the plot that you have tried to convey through this story?
So, Our Bones in Your Throat is about, well, it's about many things, but it's set in this campus where a woman drowned in a lake, and over time, the story about that keeps changing. People have different opinions about what happened there, and a lot of time passes, and suddenly it becomes a sort of ghost story. Everyone says the lake is haunted, and don't go there. And everyone has a different narrative about it. So that's what the book is about. And so two people set out to find out what actually happened and why this myth why this real history turned into a myth and got twisted so many times throughout those years.
I guess this is an era where we focus a lot on memory and the idea of memory studies. So I think you have played a lot with that, because one event, but multiple narratives, multiple memories, right? So perhaps that is a way in which history gets written as well.
That's true. And also, in a way, I would say it has also largely been written by people in power who want to take control of that narrative. So a lot gets lost along the lines. And I think coming back to the Gothic also, right? The Gothic, magic realism, these have also been ways where indigenous people talk about their own histories so that they can shift from Eurocentric histories, so that they can rewrite that.
In this novel, Our Bones in Your Throat, there is this dynamics of a female friendship between Izai and Scheherazade. But the friendship has very jagged ends. So is this how you see female bonding?
I think female friendships are very complex and beautiful. I have a lot of women in my life who I can call my sisters, and they're my chosen family. And I'm sure it's like that for a lot of women here as well. But that being said, the sisterhood, while that feels really powerful, I also think that there have been women who don't really align with the sisterhood. And these are also women who are victims of the patriarchy, right? When, let's say that I run into a serious problem and they don't stand up for me, that they don't show that solidarity, then that's where the friction happens. And I think that's what happens here as well.
This is a bit off the tangent, but do you still see women as victims?
Okay, that is a very complex word again. I don't think I can say anything about other women. I can only speak for myself, right? I can only talk about my own lived experiences. So I think there is a phase when, at least for me, there was a phase where I felt like one and I felt very sorry for myself. And those months and years were necessary for me. And then, of course, there's also a phase where I didn't want to be one. And I didn't care. I mean, I didn't want to be called that either. Like, don't look at me with sympathy. I don't want it. So that's the shift from victim to survivor or fighter, whatever you want to call yourself. And that's something my therapist told me. She was like, she said, you get to pick the word you want to use, and that's completely valid and credible.
There is this one character in the book who's called Scheherazade, who interested me for many reasons, primarily for her name, the eternal storyteller, who has to tell a story or she gets killed, right? So that is the power of the narrative, and that is why women actually needed to narrate. So we get this entire Arabian Nights, the storyteller, the complex tale within tale. So could you talk about this particular character, and what were your thoughts when you developed this Scheherazade?
So that was, I mean, that's a name that she gives herself. And this is circling back to what I said earlier when I said, you get to decide what your identity is. So for her, that stood out because for a change, someone, you know, through storytelling, they were able to empower themselves. That's how she felt when she heard Shehzade's story. So she took that for herself and showed up on stage as Shehzade.
Yes, and I think you have reiterated the therapeutic power of art and how art can cure maladies. Art can be cathartic in that sense. Would you care to talk about that in relation to this novel?
I don't actually think that art can cure maladies. I think that would make all artists feel quite self-important. But what I do see art as is a sort of witness. I think that art is an act of witnessing, and this could be witnessing the world, it could be witnessing injustice, and a lot of times, you know, there is this quote by Bertolt Brecht where he says, "In the dark times will there be singing?" I'm sure you must have heard of it. "In the dark times will there be singing?" And then the response is, "Yes, there will be singing about the dark times." So I think that's what art, music, writing, they all do. They sing about the dark times and therefore show you the truth, almost like a truth teller. And no matter how many other narratives of power exist around that, it shows up saying, this exists too. I see what you did. I don't know how much I can do about it right now, but I see what you did. I'm not going to let it slide because I see you towing the line. I see you committing that crime. And, you know, this is why a few months ago, I was reading this article by a Palestinian journalist, and he said, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive anymore tomorrow, but he said, I'm writing this, and I'm urging you to keep talking about us. Don't think that sharing our stories is pointless, because we want this archive of who we are as a people. We want our art to be out there in the world to show that we existed, and we exist and continue to. And that is why I feel that, yeah, art may not have a lot of power, but I don't lean into a side where I'm like, oh, this is completely useless, like a lot of stoic people do. But I also don't lean into that place where people think, oh, you know, art can save me. Of course, it has had its moments where it saved me. There have been times when I read someone and I thought, wow, I can't sit with my own family or my friends and be vulnerable about this because I don't know how they'll receive this vulnerability. But this writer understood how I felt. And that's what art can do. It can connect people, and it can act as a witness.
In this particular novel, is there any particular issue or event, real life event that you're trying to address?
Okay, a real life event and issue. I think you're trying to get me to talk about my college so that you know, okay, is this about professors?
Because, not just that. We have all these Harry Potter stories, which are definitely at the academia and Gothic are very intricately interwoven. This is a very Indian take on that. And I was wondering why, this colonial sort of structure of the college, which really fascinated me, and this death. So why that? That is what I was wondering.
You know, I absolutely love that you noticed that there was a colonial structure to the college, because the thing is, the college I went to had that colonial structure, if I have to be very honest. I think a lot of what I write is confessional. So for me, the college experience I had, I just plastered it onto my book. And then I do remember waking up one day and asking my agent, is this okay? Is someone going to come up to me and tell me, how could you talk about your college like this? And, you're in trouble for it. And I thought, I already passed out. I got my certificate. I think it's okay. but, but yeah, I guess I would say it is a very deeply personal novel. I do write a lot of poetry. So for me, I also perform poetry. So there has always been a lot of confessionalism. And I do think that art is very personal. I still speak for myself, but having spoken to a lot of other young writers, budding writers, I've not spoken to very old writers. But I mean, whoever I've spoken to who writes or tries to write, they've always told me that it's catharsis for them and that it heals some wounds at least. So I think that's beautiful.
So you spoke about this confessional mode of writing. We have a lot of confessional women writers from Sylvia Plath downwards. And, well, as an Indian young lady trying to write in the confessional mode, do you face any obstacles in that way? Or do you fear societal censure?
I think I do. I mean, I think that everyone is afraid to some degree of speaking their truth because we're always, it's very human to feel afraid of being judged, be concerned about what people would think. But I see it as a practice of shadow work, which is something, Carl Jung talks about the shadow self, and this is a combination of all your repressed parts. It's got shame, fear, all the people that you want to hide that you are because you don't want other people seeing these sides to you because you're scared of being judged. So I see it as shadow work for myself. When I document all of this, I know that I'm getting vulnerable. I know that vulnerability will expose me, and in that exposure, it's highly likely that people will know what hurts and, where my pain points are and how they can, how you can get to someone, how you can hurt someone. You're literally putting yourself out there, right? You're getting vulnerable with your emotions. But that being said, this documentation helps me understand myself better. So while I'm writing and I'm putting my writing out there, people are understanding me and understanding that vulnerability. I'm also understanding myself in real time. And I think that there is not just joy in it, but also some sort of purpose.
Yeah, it's a mixture of resistance as well as empowerment, right? And you have brought out a poetry collection called Teething,
yes,
if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and a couple of poems were prescribed in the syllabus you said.
Yeah.
So how does it feel to be taught in a college? Because English teachers are known for reading into the lines, above the lines, and reading so much into it that perhaps the writer wouldn't recognize herself. Oh, this is not what I wrote, perhaps the writer would say. So how has your experience been of being taught in a college?
I've never sat in a classroom where teething was taught, though I've always wanted to. I do remember speaking to a professor who asked, would you like to come when I'm teaching teething? And I was like, yeah, I would love to. But also, it's categorized under trauma studies. And for me, it's going to be very weird sitting there and being dissected. And I'm not even talking about, oh, this is how they're going to interpret it, and then that's not the right way of interpretation. I don't think so, because I remember reading this essay about, was it called The Death of the Artist? I don't actually remember.
Death of the Author by Barth?
Yes. Oh, thank God you are an English professor. But that one, and I feel like once an artist has written their work, I think it's very clearly open to interpretation, unless, of course, it's taken out of context in a really political way, and you're like, wait, that's not the side I stand on. Don't twist my words so that you can feed your political agenda. Then I think outside of those ethical boundaries, I think it's all good for me. It doesn't matter.
Where do you think you're most comfortable with? Writing novels or writing poetry?
I would have to say poetry. I really do have a soft spot for short, I mean, like really short writing. Writing a novel is a very daunting affair, and I really like writing it, but also I do have my moments where I have to come back to the story, right? It doesn't get over in a limited time period. I have to wake up and I'll be like, if I haven't touched the manuscript in 2 months, then I have to come back and read everything I wrote, and then I have to connect with those characters again. I have to. It's a bit more complex, and it's also a step back from the confessionalism for me, because I feel like you're still talking through these characters, and you can hide parts of yourself in them and divide it. But poetry is not like that for me. I think I show up fully as myself. And performance poetry is much harder for me because I'm not just writing this on a page. I'm also looking into people's eyes when I'm telling my story, and I would say, that's more vulnerable for me than writing confessional poetry.
We also spoke about something you called personal curriculum, where you're not actually slotted into something other people want you to read or others want you to study. You sort of thought about developing a reading list on your own, and that is a project that you're working on.
So, I think once I was done with university and I realized, yeah, sure, life happens. We have to work. And I still wanted to just study something, everything. And I keep thinking about how during the Renaissance, people would pick up everything, physics, chemistry, English, everything. They just wanted to learn everything. And I thought, why aren't we doing that now? We should. You don't need to be good at something to just get to know it. And I think curiosity is a very, very powerful trait to have, to just be curious about everything without wondering if, okay, what can I get out of it? Because I think we think like that a lot now. We think, what is the outcome? And I understand where it's coming.
It's become utilitarian, right?
It is very utilitarian. And I feel like it's also because of the kind of capitalist society we live in, where everything just feels like we need to come up with a product. There needs to be something coming out of this, and it can't be for the sheer joy of it. And I'm not talking about art for art's sake. I know it was kind of going towards that. That's not what I mean. I don't stand by that. But
because art needs to be published, literature needs to be published, and then you're feeding into the capitalist system all over again.
Yeah, that's true also. I think that I would say it's very easy for me to sit here and critique capitalism. But that being said, it's also okay. I'm learning to be inside the capitalist system and critique it from there. Because a lot of times, it's hard to escape. It's everywhere. So, yeah, I don't believe in having a specific outcome when I'm looking at curriculums. And so this is something I started doing this year. I would give myself a personal curriculum in the beginning of the month. So let's say tomorrow, 1st December, and I would take out my notebook and I would write down all the books I want to read, all the poems that I want to read, maybe all the podcasts, all the interviews I want to read by people I find inspiring, and I would give myself that month to do it. And I would also it's almost like a little listicle. I'll have these little boxes, I'll check it off. And it's a very fun thing to do because you can curate your own experiences. I would like to call them experiences because reading is one. So that's something that I started doing. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I don't think I had any purpose for doing it. I just thought, I want to do it. I want to give it a try. And what am I going to lose?
That's wonderful speaking to you because I teach generations of students and I find them increasingly reluctant to read. So it's wonderful meeting somebody young like you who's voluntarily putting a reading list together and doing all these things. And you write this young adult fiction, and we know that reading is sort of taken a sort of downslide now. So how do you actually address that? Because people are more into images and fluid images at that.
I think that if you have the privilege to access books, you should. I'm not someone who looks up to anyone who can read and write because I also feel like we're living in a country where not everyone has access to literacy. So this is not a flex where you're like, oh, I'm a writer, I'm a reader. It shouldn't be a flex, you know, that's just disgusting. But that being said, if you have access to books, then you should pick one up because it's reading is a political act. That's why. And when you read, you get to understand, you get closer to understanding what people go through. And it's not just that, but also, I mean, it's a very powerful medium of understanding what's happening around you. And I think that if people have access to it, they definitely should pick it up. And that's the beauty of a personal curriculum also, right? It's no one is forcing a specific curriculum down your throat. No one's saying, go read Shakespeare and like, you know, spend months and years just reading a dead white guy's work. No one's saying that. You can pick, which is how I come across some really wonderful South Asian writers because I do my research for my reading curriculum and I say, this is the book I want to read. I see beauty in it. I'm going to try it out. And I think if more people start doing that, it would be wonderful. And I understand why reading is dropping also. It is because of social media and it is messing with our attention span. And I also find myself being drawn to reels all the time. So I'm not even complaining about it, honestly. I'm not pointing any fingers. If I have to point fingers, I'll be pointing it at myself because so much time goes away when you're online. And so what I've started doing is I've started doing this thing called bloom scrolling instead of doom scrolling. So I have this alternate account where I follow educators. I follow people talking about books that they've discovered. I talk about people, I mean, just anything that inspires me. So my feed is full of what I'm looking forward to versus random information thrown at me. Because that's also quite jarring, right? Think about it. You're looking at, there's a genocide happening, so you're experiencing some sort of panic and anxiety and a feeling of, I can't do anything about this. This feels hopeless to me. And you get, and also rage, right? And then you're scrolling and the next video that comes up is someone cooking and then you're like, okay. And then the next one is a meme or a joke or something and you're laughing. And how do you think that, doesn't that take a toll on your brain? Your brain is not supposed to, be fed so much information in a day. We don't realize this because we've normalized this. That's the problem.
Oh yeah, that's wonderful. And you started writing at quite a young age, and how has the journey been as a writer? How do you find time and how do you factor that into your daily routine?
It's a very complicated journey because I find myself changing every time. The more I read, the more I become a different person. And when I say different person, I would also say a person closer to who I think my authentic self actually is. So it's interesting because if I go back to what I wrote when I was very young, I would absolutely hate it. And this isn't coming from a space of, oh, because the writing has improved, craft is better. It's coming from a place of, you're a child, you didn't know anything. But I've also learned to be kinder to my inner child because I feel like I've been doing a lot of helicopter parenting over my own self for many, many years. So yeah, it's been a turbulent journey, but I know that it's been worth it for me throughout.
I think you're as much a writer as you are a performer, and this wouldn't be complete until you performed a poem that you have written, because you are a performance poet. So would you please?
I just want to know, was anyone at yesterday's 7 p.m. session? Okay, I'm just going to repeat one poem from it. Are you cool with that? Did you like the first one or the second one?
The first was the Kerala one, the second one was the anger one.
Yeah.
The anger.
The anger one. What did you like?
I really like that one too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just go with what they said and perform what they wanted. Okay. I usually use a standing mic, but I think I will work with this. You don't have one, no? No worries, that's fine. Those who break you will one day bow to you. Those who break you will one day bow to you. The enemy will burst into a bouquet of flowers and they will apologize for being cowards who tried to step on you. Apologize for the harm they tried to do. But this is how the story goes. Seething, crying, drunk driving, bruising yourself on strangers' beds. Your therapist begging you to take your meds. Traumatized and brokenhearted. That's how you started. But this is how the story goes. You trusted them, you loved them hard, and now you forget them harder. You wake up, brush your teeth, think about them a couple of times, and that's it. Never again. Hey, do you hear me? Never again. What did you love about them anyway, huh? The way they manipulated and disrespected, or the way they sent you howling to your mother, friends, lovers, brothers, sisters, any of the others who didn't see your worth and only gave you a truckload of hurt? Fuck them. Because this is how the story goes. Glitter on cheeks, paint on toes, do your liners heavy, prepare to get ready, march into the city streets like a divine beast, a visual feast. Wear that blazer right now, not later. There is no special occasion. You are the special occasion. Fuck the side character. You're a hero, all new age, every single angle shot from the female gaze, and they don't get to damage you like that. And then expect you to keep looking back. Tell them your eyes are too pretty to be looking at crap. Like, who the fuck do they think they are? You didn't come this far to fall here. So my dear, don't you dare shed a tear. Because the gods were tripping when they made you. Head banging to your breath like it was trance music. You were meant to make it big. So let them watch and burn and wish they had you back. But the fact is that this is how the story goes. Higher and higher and higher you rose from rock bottom. When they thought you were forgotten, you showed the world that this is your story. No, you are the story. You're unstoppable, unshakable, untamable, invincible. You are magic that's meditating. You are dangerous because no matter what, you are always growing. But above all, you saved yourself. You are brave, no doubt. You didn't let adversity fold you into origami and throw you in the trash and all that jazz. You woke up, you got up, you worked your way through it all to shine hard and stand tall. And if anyone makes you feel small ever again, remember, my friend, you are not theirs to destroy. Do you hear me? You are not theirs to destroy. So don't you dare stand there grieving over what they did to you, and instead look at what you've become. Accept what you've become, acknowledge what you've become, and celebrate what you've become. A testimony to holy resurrection, your comeback, a personal revolution. You are freedom and you are grace. You are rain and you are riot. Not subtle and not quiet. You are graphic and unrestrained. Your beauty refusing to be chained. You are fire and you are love. The kind that has doves inside its boxing gloves. You are the raging force of all the things that you have survived and will continue to survive for as long as you are alive. Thank you.
Wow, where does the fire come from?
I don't know, to be very honest.
And well, this is a question that I wanted to ask you. Why did you choose English as a medium to write in? If you aren't too exhausted by that performance.
No, I'm not exhausted by that performance at all. English because, you know, I struggle with English. I have to be very honest because it's not my first language, it's not my mother tongue. And I think that's what I tell a lot of people because I realized a lot of my friends also they always would tell me, you know, I don't know how to speak to you because sometimes I feel like I'm not very confident about my English. And I say, even I'm not, to be very honest. I pronounce words different sometimes. Yeah, but English because my mother tongue Tulu doesn't have a script right now. And I used to write in Malayalam when I was younger. But I think that it's going to take me a long time before I even attempt because I haven't written in Malayalam like for a very long time. And I have just started reading Malayalam books again. So I'm like, let me finish reading a lot of books and then get to this because I don't believe in writing without reading other people's work. So,
What are your current projects after this novel?
my primary project is me. I am working on myself as a person. But with writing, I think I'm still leaning towards writing a novel only. And I have been working on a draft, and it's again in the magical realism space. So, yeah, that's something that I've been.
Who are the writers who have inspired you to pursue your creative pursuits in this genre? Because I think even with your Alice stories, there was this intense focus on magical realism, right?
Yeah,
Because I think that is also very interesting, where you look at Alice in Wonderland
Yeah,
and give it a
yeah,
very different
yeah.
take. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, I feel that for me, Marcus has played a very big role. And I think anyone who even approaches magical realism would move towards Marcus first, which is great. I also really loved this book which came out recently. It's a translation. It's by Eka Karniawan. It's called Beauty is a Wound. It's an Indonesian novel. And it is a very beautiful book which has very similar magical realism elements. I've been reading Isabel Allende's House of Spirits these days. And yeah, I think in the magical realism space, I would say books are more my inspiration than the author themselves. But I started moving towards it because it almost felt like a medium where you could talk about your own reality without, without actually pointing fingers. I always saw magical realism as a variant of the allegory. Because if you remember, in Animal Farm, Orwell writes a very particular story. Everyone knows who it's about, and yet Orwell manages to escape in some way in the storytelling part of it. So I think magical realism is also like that, because if you trace it back to its Latin American roots, people told stories with a little bit of mysticism because they were also trying to reclaim their histories and also speak up against authority. So I think it's a very misunderstood medium, but it's also it's a great space to speak your truth, but in a clever way. So readers can read between the lines and they'll understand what you're saying, but you are challenging authority, and at the same time, you're writing it in a certain kind of way.
I guess, yeah, Marcus has his own way of magical realism, but I think in India, we begin with magical realism, right? The Ramayana and the Mahabharata. They're
And
such slippery spaces.
even folklore, right?
course.
There's like all these yakshi stories and all. Yes, but you were asking.
Yeah, so has that influenced you, this Indian tradition of magical realism, where, a king has 4 wives? Real. They get pregnant eating a mango? Magic. So we have the seamless transition between magic and realism in our own ethos as well.
Completely agree. I find that funny also. But to be very honest, yeah, I think we've always had magical realism and folklore in our writing, in our literature, and it goes, ancient literature has that. But for me, at least, I think I derived a lot of my magical realism from the Yakshi stories. I'll be very honest. I was very fascinated.
Yakshi?
Yes,
Yeah,
I was
the
just
first
very
feminist, the first woman who wanted to walk alone in Kerala at night, I guess, is the Yakshi. That is my interpretation of the Yakshi.
I love that. I love
Because
that.
Kerala is a very hypocritical society, extraordinarily patriarchal. So we had to create the Yakshi, the woman who would kill you with a glance. And so women could walk freely at night. Well, that is my take on the Yakshi. Maybe you have
I love it. So you think that she had to be made scary like that, and she had to
Yeah.
be made a seductress, right? Think about
Not
it.
just a seductress. She never kills women. She only kills men. So that's what set me thinking. Because women wouldn't torture her at night. The men would want their way with her. So she puts out a story, yeah. And then women could walk at night. Right?
I love it. No, I also, the question of vilifying women who don't walk the path that's been given to them, right? I think all these folklores about these angry or scary women are always leading back to the same thing. These are women that men don't like.
These are women who told their own stories. The witches are women who flew on the one thing that confined them to housework, the broom. So that is our liberty. Let us celebrate it. Let us celebrate it through spectral narratives, through the Gothic, through young adult fiction. And now the questions are open to the audience. Over to you.
Could someone please give him a mic?
Thank you for this wonderful discussion. Just curious how the formative years living in Kerala, growing up in Trivandrum, that affected you as a poet. Because, one of the British Library Culture Cafe journals, it contains one of your very young poems, like Coca-Cola came to town, Pepsi Cola, say no more, that kind of poems. So, and also when you look at Teething, it also contains elements of a tragic life. So just curious, how was it like living in Kerala and growing up in Trivandrum, the toxic culture, like she said. So how did that, affect you as a poet, as a person? Thank you.
So my, when I first moved to Trivandrum, and this was me coming from Singapore. So I spent 10 years in Singapore, like right from when I was a baby all the way till my 6th standard. So my father moved, and when we all moved along, and it was strange because I didn't know Malayalam when I moved. So in 6th grade, I joined, and everyone around me was speaking in Malayalam, and it was very confusing for me because I was still learning A, and I would go home and my mother would sit there teaching me A, this is how you do it. And in school, everyone would already be talking in Malayalam, and they would talk to me in Malayalam also. So it was confusing as far as identity was concerned, because when we moved here, I just assumed I was Malayali. And then other kids would tell me, you don't look like one, you're not. And I went to my mother and I said, I'm not? And she said, no, you're from Mangalore. And I was like, what is Mangalore now? Because obviously at that time I was an NRI kid, I know nothing. I was very ignorant. And so for me, those years of living in Trivandrum at that time were very confusing because I was still very nostalgic for other places. But then, and also, it's a bit jarring when you don't feel accepted by other students. So, but that being said, over time, I also got very close to what I would call my Malayali identity. Even though I'm not from here, this is mostly what I know, so why not? And there was always this longing to connect. There was always this longing to feel accepted, and I think that's what Teething does, because Teething turns Kerala itself into a character, but in a very, I know maybe it's also quite romanticized in the book, but for me, it was just a very gradual transition where I just started loving everything, and I thought, okay, you know what, maybe I should accept the place first and everything that it is, and then allow it to accept me. So, yeah, I think even my poetry has probably evolved. I don't know what you read in the space you told me. You said something when I was very young. I'm sure it must be very different from what I write right now. But yeah, I think even poetry helped me bond with Kerala a lot. I believe that.
This is less of a question, rather a comment, so make of it what both of you will, actually.
Of course.
Because even yesterday, the aspect of writing being extremely confessional, right? And the poem that you performed today, as also yesterday, it led me to only one person, who is Emily Dickinson, and who I personally believe has sort of vibed away from, even, I'm not intending to offend you, but even when you talk about confessional women authors, we start from Sylvia Plath. But let's be real, Emily Dickinson started it all. She was writing, I'm out with lanterns looking for myself, I'm nobody. She was crying, she was talking about all of this. And then in her era, so the structures were there, but they were seen as right. And so when we now, in this current era, look back at what she was writing, it's so evident, right? All of this was wrong with the society, and it's so evident in how she's now putting it out by virtue of these poems, by virtue of her words. So now that I'm forming a question, it's do you think that in the future, your poetry will be sort of a lens by virtue of which people can understand that, in 2025 or 2024, we came this far, but still so much was still wrong, right? And so it can act as, like you said, a rhetoric to the past, while also being sort of a lens to understand ki, oh, we have actually moved away from like A, B, and C.
Yeah, by the way, I love the Nobody poem by Emily Dickinson. It's one of my favorites. I think that, first of all, I feel like I really can't control what happens to my work right now or even after I die, right? Think about it. A lot of writers often just assume if their work is being read right now, they will someday leave a legacy or something. But maybe years later, someone will read what I write and think, what was this woman writing? It's extremely problematic. How could she say that? I think that is why so many things also come into play, right? Cultural context, the time period, and all of that. So even when I'm reading old writers, there are many things which are jarring for me. And I think, oh man, you shouldn't have written that. But then also, I also ask myself, okay, these are crossing ethical boundaries. But at that time also, I mean, you know, even then, right, they say artists are ahead of their time, so why weren't you? But yeah, I think someone like a Pablo Neruda I would totally cancel, because I'm like, okay, I'm absolutely not siding with an abuser, a murderer, or, I mean, those are like, you know, like a different. But yeah, I do believe that cultural context matters. I do believe that the time period in which they were at matters. And like I said, I can't control what happens to my own work years down the line. I would like to think that years down the line, maybe a 16-year-old picks it up, and maybe my entire body of work disappears. And there's some 16-year-old who just randomly stumbles across it, and it speaks to her in some way. And I think that itself is something which is good. But yeah, years later, you don't know what's going to happen. But I think there was more to that question. So do you want to circle back to what you asked, if I've not filled the gaps?
So much was wrong in that era, and then she somehow survived, but she still sort of managed to put her angst out by virtue of her words. And so at this, like in 2025, it's both a sort of a sign of hope that things get better, but at the same time, it's a constant sort of remembrance that it has been worse. And so I would also assume that it's a sort of, that there is a looming threat that it could go back to that.
If I could just jump in there, she began by saying that for her, art is a process of witnessing.
Yeah.
So we have this entire discourse which talks about Kerala modernity and the Kerala model of development and the healthy ratio we have of women as to men and how lovely a life women get to lead in Kerala. That's the discourse. Hers will be the witnessing of the actual life certain women have to lead even in this 2025. And I think we have crossed our time. Thank you very much. Thank you,
thank
Megha.
you so
Thank you,
much
lovely
for having
audience.
us.
And thank you, Manorama HORTUS, for hosting us.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you so much for, it was a wonderful session. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. That was really good, too.